front begin to drift south and eastward. The central and eastern parts of Kansas will very probably be cloudy in the morning, and then western Kansas will begin to get increasing cloudiness by tomorrow afternoon. Today, however, very, very pleasant reading. 73 up in the Goodland area, 72 at Garden City, 70 reported by Dodge City and Liberal, 72 over by the good folks of Garden.
What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Joe's Tech. Very excited about the video we're going to be doing today, which is a review on the new P110 Luce from Antec. This case kind of debuted, I guess you could say, in Computex this past year, but it wasn't actually ready for production, so we're almost nearing that point where it's going to be available for everybody, and I was lucky enough to get a sample to take a look at right before the launch here. The first thoughts I had when I pulled this case out of the box is that A, it was pretty large, and B, is that it had a very quality, I guess you could say, feel. As far as the size goes, this case measures in at 20.5 inches high, 19.25 inches front to back, and it has a depth of about 9.1/8 of an inch. So it's a fairly large case in comparison to a lot of the other mid-towers that you're going to see out there. But it's not oversized, you know. I think it's just right, especially if you're looking for something to, aesthetically please the eye. Speaking of aesthetics, I think Antec pulled out all the stops here by giving the case just the right amount of branding. I thought that the thumb screws were really cool. They put a nice A for the Antec logo on all of the thumb screws. Of course, they have the Antec logo on the front bezel of the case, and of course tucked into the power supply shroud as well. So not only do we see thumb screws on the front glass panel of the case, but Antec took it a step further and also installed thumb screws for the rear of the case to hold the rear steel door on as well, which I thought was kind of unique. Usually we see a pretty basic sliding steel door for the back of these cases, so I thought it was kind of a cool idea for them to continue the theme to the back of the case as well. So looking at the front bezel of the case, it is removable, of course, by pulling the bottom of the bezel and then popping the top out afterward. And of course, it was nice to see that Antec did not leave any cables attached like we saw on the P8 model. So immediately behind the front bezel, you guys will notice there's a top to bottom dust filter, which is obviously kind of necessary, but it's nice that they made it simple to install for maintenance. You know, if you guys want to clean your dust filter real quick, it's a pretty easy job. You don't have to worry about any cabling or anything like that, and the magnetic dust filter just pops off. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned about airflow issues in cases like this with the solid front bezel, but Antec kind of thought of that as well, and they made those aesthetic grills, I guess you could call them, on the sides of the front bezel removable. And basically, if you don't have enough airflow, you could pop those guys out, get a lot more airflow, and the case is still going to be functional because you have that top to bottom dust filter to keep things from polluting your case. Speaking of dust filtration, you'll notice they added a nice, clean looking dust filter for the top of the case, and of course, hidden neatly on the bottom of the case and easily removable as well, they added a track with another dust filter at the bottom of the case. So big props to Antec for making the dust filtration really well, very easy to remove and add, and also really good looking. So the only thing left to mention on the outside of the case, of course, is the top I/O, which is a power button, an LED RGB controller button, which lets you select different functions or colors, things like that. Of course, you have your audio inputs and mic input, dual USB 3.0, even though they're black, they are USB 3.0. And lastly, they added HDMI, which if you have an HDMI header, will allow you to connect that in for those of you guys who are looking for a nice VR case. So moving inside the case, you guys may notice that there is a little more branding inside the case. And the one thing that I will say was kind of off-putting a little bit is the amount of yellow, and there's not very much of it. Obviously, it's on the thumb screws, and you can see it there on the cable management rail, which is removable. I know some people are going to have a hard time with that color, but at least it's not too much, and I think they did a really good job at kind of keeping it to a minimum. So you guys will notice on the power supply shroud, they added 2 hard drive enclosures, which can hold either 3.5-inch drives or 2.5-inch SSDs. And what I really liked about the way that they designed this is instead of putting a bunch of slots in the power supply shroud or a bunch of screw holes, they pretty much have one thumb screw that holds the enclosure in, and then you remove that and you can slide the tray back and out, and they leave these little studs there instead of having a bunch of holes or tracks or anything like that. So I thought that was pretty nifty. As far as fan support goes, on the rear of the case there is 120mm fan included, and on the front of the case there's 120mm fan included. For max support though, you can only have that 120 in the rear. You can have dual 120 or 140s in the top of the case, and you can have triple 120s or 140s in the front of the case. And I'd imagine you can figure out which radiators will fit there as well. You can only do a 240 on the top of the case or a 360 on the front of the case. But in the rear, you're still going to be limited to basically nothing because there's only room for a 120mm fan. One thing that is kind of unique about this case, on that cable management rail that we talked about earlier, there is a GPU support bracket. I'm sure a lot of you guys have run into this before, where you install a nice big graphics card in your build, and then over time it starts to sag a little bit. Even though you maybe have some heavy duty extensions or cables holding it in place, it still is going to kind of droop over time. So they've implemented a way to support your GPU by installing this small bracket to that rail, and then you can either move it onto the left track or the right track. There's a lot of play that they've kind of provided for you to be able to support whatever GPU that you need to support. Speaking of GPUs, another great thing that they've added here is 2 slots. If you guys would like to vertically mount your GPU, of course you'll have to provide your own PCIe extension card, but at least they have the option there for you guys if you wanted to do it. So whenever I do these case reviews, you guys might notice I always throw in pretty much the same hardware, but instead of just doing a review on the case and the way it looks and how I think it's going to react or how I think it's going to do, I like to at least put a basic set of hardware in there and see kind of how the case works and see if there's any weird quirks or anything that sticks out. And I did find one thing with this case, and it was something that I think I did incorrectly, but I want to share it with you guys anyways. I popped the rear I/O shield into the back of the case. I started to put my motherboard in, and I noticed that the motherboard was hitting the PCIe covers, and I wasn't at the I/O shield. And what happened there is Antec has stops inside the case where you're supposed to install the I/O shield, but then there's also kind of a frame where you could install the I/O shield further out. So it was a little bit confusing there as far as the layout and how that goes. And then there was like this kind of awkward gap that kind of gets left behind once you install the I/O shield where it's supposed to be, but I figured I would just mention it in case you guys run into the same problem. So as soon as you open the back of the case, you'll notice they've included an SSD tray, which is removable, and it's held in place by one thumb screw and uses kind of the same sliding process as the drive enclosures on the power supply shroud inside the case. The SSDs can be installed on the inside of that enclosure or the outside, and the reason there's kind of support for that there is because there is just a ton of room for cable management in the back of this case. You can literally fill it up. I think I have a little bit of a clip to show you guys where I'm measuring from the back side of the motherboard tray to the outside of the case, and it was kind of difficult to show with the amount of lines that are on this case, but basically it's over an inch of clearance that you get for cable management, so there's plenty of room. I did notice when I was looking at the leads, there's obviously your HDMI, gold-plated HDMI, the HD audio connections, your USB 3.0, but I also noticed there was 2 LED RGB leads which go back to the in-case, I guess it's a hub or controller, but what's kind of weird, it doesn't say if they're for control or for accessories. From the way it looks like they're for accessories. I don't think there's any supported like official accessories yet, and I haven't been told about any accessories that might become available, but I didn't have any generic RGB strips to test with it. However, I did try plugging in like an NZXT lead, and of course that did not work. In fact, I think I might have destroyed my strips. So before you go ahead and plug in your LED RGB strips, just make sure that you take a look at the Antec site once that information becomes available, and make sure whatever you're attempting to plug into that is compatible. Looking at the bottom of the case, there is also 2 caddies for drives, 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch. Those just slide out like you would typically see. But what I thought was pretty cool is there is a thumb screw. I didn't know what it was for. I just pretty much removed that, and they've included like a little track, and the whole enclosure comes out, which is pretty nice. So you're not, stuck having that whole enclosure if you wanted to install some other hardware down there. Maybe you're planning to do a water-cooled build, and that part's easily removable without having to, drill out any rivets or anything like that. So I thought that was kind of a nice feature as well. I'm pretty sure that covers the majority of the things that I noted with this case. I have to say, I was right with my first impression, and this case is really nice. In fact, I hate to say it, but I'm very tempted to maybe replace that case. But my wife also needs a new computer, so maybe I will be upgrading hers, and maybe we'll do a little custom build for her in this case. I don't know. I really like this case. I don't have too many complaints other than the little issue that I had with the I/O shield. Take that as you will. And then, a couple of the things that I may have mentioned here in the video, but there's not really anything that, is really going to stop me from using this. I do seriously believe that this case has the potential to be one of the best cases of 2017 and a true comeback for Antec. It has the things that we like to see. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. Obviously, aside from the things that I mentioned here in the video, is there anything that you can find that's a major flaw with this case? Would you guys like to see me use this in a real build in the future? And of course, if you guys have any questions, feedback, and concerns, I'm always happy to hear it. Go ahead and leave those all in the comment section below. Of course, if you guys enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave me a thumbs up on the way out. And if you guys want to see more tech videos like this in the future, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks again to Antec, and thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next video.